From clearly talented A-list stars not realizing their version of the French accent wasn't up to scratch, to debuting heroes not exactly getting off to the best of starts in the supersphere. It's plain to see that this bunch of actors weren't 100% prepared for what was heading their way. Gareth here from WhatCulture.com, and here are 10 actors that totally underprepared for a movie role.
Want to stay safe online and save big? Get up to 76% off a 2-year NordVPN plan, plus 4 months free and up to a $50 Amazon gift card. Just scan the QR code or click the link in the description, and it's all yours.
Number 10, Sabrina Carpenter, Quinn Ackerman, Work It. During the events of Netflix's dance comedy flick, Work It, Sabrina Carpenter's Quinn Ackerman ultimately goes from awkward mover to dance machine. But in order to convincingly portray the fact that her character wasn't initially quite at the same level of those busting a move around her, the star who isn't exactly known for being a bad dancer in real life had a clever idea. As Carpenter would explain in a BuzzFeed interview with some of her castmates, the actor specifically opted to not fully learn the routine she was asked to perform in certain scenes. In particular, the moment that saw Ackerman auditioning for a place on the Thunderbirds team actually boasted a Carpenter who had no idea what was going on. In fact, Carpenter was actually taking her lead from the 2 girls in front of her, meaning that she intentionally was always an awkward count behind as she brilliantly flailed around on stage. Number 9, Michael Gambon, Albus Dumbledore, the Harry Potter series. For a time, it felt as though there wasn't actually a soul walking the earth who hadn't at least picked up one of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter novels for a quick skim to see what all the fuss was about. Surprisingly though, one of the most notable presences in the eventual big screen adaptations of the Wizarding world actually never so much as turned a page of the source material during his time in the Cloak. Not really feeling the need to add this particular element to his preparations for the all-important role of Albus Dumbledore, Michael Gambon went on record on a number of occasions to confess that he had little desire to comb through Rowling's pages. On top of stating that it's safer to just simply follow the script he is handed, the actor who stepped in for the late Richard Harris in the part would also note that if he had opted to read them, he'd likely get upset about the scenes that were missing in the screenplay. Had Gambon actually given the books a read, however, there's a chance he would have potentially been able to dodge the odd backlash sent his way by those who felt his version of the character wasn't faithful to the one on the page, with a number of upset Potterheads feeling the Brits' take on the powerful wizard was far harsher than the one they'd spent time with in the novels. Boo-hoo. Number 8, Kit Harrington, Milo Pompey. Another star who didn't exactly throw themselves into books and various other forms of research when heading into a project, instead opting to take the script as gospel like Gambon before him. Kit Harrington wasn't exactly an expert on all things Pompeii going into the flick of the same name. Largely due to the rather busy Game of Thrones star just not having enough time beforehand, Harrington actually only got around to taking in the remains of the city itself that was destroyed after an eruption from Mount Vesuvius after he'd wrapped on the film. And while the star would admit to being ashamed at the lack of historical research he did when preparing for the role of Milo, a Celtic slave turned gladiator in the city during the year of the fateful event, he was pleasantly surprised to realize just how historically accurate the team behind the film actually were when creating the world his character existed in on screen. All the accurate set building in the world. Harrington noted that around 30 different sets were crafted in Toronto for the shoot, still couldn't stop this particular historical epic going down in history as the wrong sort of disaster flick, however. Number 7, James McAvoy, Charles Xavier, X-Men First Class. When the star found out that he was being entrusted with bringing to life the earlier years of the leader of the X-Men himself, it's not hard to see why James McAvoy quickly assumed he needed to perform one rather specific action in the lead-up. So before he first set foot onto the set of X-Men First Class all those years ago, the Scottish sensation decided about a month in advance of filming that he was gonna bite the bald bullet and shave off his precious hair. Only when he revealed his shiny preparation to the team behind the X-Men prequel, he soon discovered that being bald was most definitely not part of the plan for Charles Xavier at this point in the story. Far from it, in fact. They actually wanted McAvoy to have long hair in that 2014 outing. So the star was ultimately forced to sit in a makeup chair for a grand total of 15 hours in order to equip him with hair extensions for his Professor X debut. Number 6, Viggo Mortensen, Aragorn, The Lord of the Rings trilogy. As Peter Jackson's ambitious journey to bring the epic trilogy of The Lord of the Rings to the big screen got underway all those years ago, the director initially rewarded Stuart Townsend with the meaty role of Aragorn. However, it soon became clear that Townsend was just too darn young for the role of the future king of Gondor. So a replacement in the form of Viggo Mortenson was swapped in rather late in the casting day. After being convinced by his Lord of the Rings loving son that it was a role worth taking though, the actor who would eventually become synonymous with the badass ranger turned leader of men arrived on set and immediately felt underprepared, as he put it. And with the rest of the cast already beginning shooting and some of them being out in New Zealand for weeks or months at the point of his arrival, it's not hard to see why the gifted thespian felt as though he was playing some serious catch-up in those early days on set. If that wasn't enough to deal with, Mortenson also confessed to feeling understandably awkward about the concept of replacing another actor for the first time too. Despite these early concerns, however, Viggo soon found his human-sized feet and went on to produce one of the most gripping performances the critically acclaimed series had to offer. Number 5. Hugh Jackman, Wolverine, X-Men. Due to the fact that original Wolverine actor Doug Ray Scott was forced to drop out of the first X-Men movie due to scheduling conflicts late on, Hugh Jackman was eventually thrown into the mutant party 3 weeks into the film's shoot. And as the eventual megastar would ultimately explain years later, he was asked by the studio if he could get into shirtless Logan shape for the 2000 flick in just 3 weeks, eventually noting how he might have overpromised. Not exactly nailing the physique they were looking for, director Bryan Singer swiftly decided to push his topless moments back 4 months to the end of the shoot. Now expecting any actor to get into the sort of freakish shape Jackman ultimately would in later mutant entries in such a small space of time was always going to be unrealistic. But assuming they are completely aware of the existence of the animal their on-screen character is named after, that's not too much to ask, right? Well, as it goes, Jackman was actually under the impression that Wolverines weren't a real thing during his early days in the role, and his call to heavily research wolves instead soon backfired after being informed by Singer that not only was he not playing that type of furry creature, but that those make-believe Wolverines were anything but. All those hours spent howling at the moon, and for what? Number 4. Marlon Brando, Dr. Moreau, The Island of Dr. Moreau. The Marlon Brando spotted popping up in the likes of The Island of Dr. Moreau and Free Money towards the end of his career was a far cry from the legendary performer who'd captivated generations with his mesmerizing work in everything from A Streetcar Named Desire to The Godfather. By the time he rocked up on set for that aforementioned Moreau project, the iconic thespian seemed very much bored with the world of filmmaking, according to the film's screenwriter Ron Hutchinson. And the mind behind the script of The Island of Dr. Moreau would even go as far as to say that the overweight, unprepared, mocking, dismissive star seemed as though he was here to sabotage this movie. Now, it is worth noting how the star's daughter had tragically committed suicide in the lead up to shooting on the 1996 sci-fi flick, something that must have no doubt impacted his preparations and overall state of mind whilst working on the ultimately doomed picture. But between reportedly having to have the lines he didn't want to learn read out to him through an earpiece, and often even refusing to leave his trailer altogether, it's clear that Brando simply wasn't prepared to play ball when it came time to unleash what would ultimately go on to be branded as perhaps his worst film by critic Roger Ebert. Number 3. Ewan McGregor, Lumiere, Beauty and the Beast. Scottish acting powerhouse Ewan McGregor has proven time and time again that he's more than capable of mastering another accent. Despite utterly nailing everything from a smooth RP to an American twang though, one particular accent McGregor wasn't quite as confident with ultimately left him with a bit of egg on his face during the recording of a little Disney remake by the name of Beauty and the Beast. As the star himself would explain on the Graham Norton show a few years back, the fact McGregor had been married to a French woman for 20 years left him feeling foolishly confident about his ability to unleash a French-sounding voice as Lumiere. Unfortunately for him though, the folks capturing the Scots voice didn't want the sounds he was delivering throughout, leaving him sounding entirely Mexican as he then again attempted to speak the candelabra lines. In fact, his delivery was so disastrous, the star would confess to having to go back and redo some of his lines in order to cover up his initial lack of proper prep. Number 2. Tom Hardy, Bronson. Very few would question Tom Hardy's ability to entirely transform into another human being at this current moment in time. However, back before he was the household acting icon he is today, it's safe to say that one person in particular wasn't entirely convinced that the person tasked with bringing him to life in a movie had what it took to play him convincingly. In fact, when none other than real-life bare-knuckle boxer and criminal Charles Bronson first laid eyes on Hardy, he complained and couldn't see how the actor, who probably weighed about 11 stone drenched with stones in his pockets, would be able to play the meaty figure in 2008, Bronson. After not being able to look at Hardy without feeling that he'd been hard done by, Bronson ultimately changed his tune the minute he saw the rising star put his mind to packing on the pounds, however. And after telling Charlie that he'd fix it, the stacked Hardy that turned up in front of him during a meeting 2 weeks later ended up leaving Bronson thoroughly impressed. As the infamous figure himself put it, "You won't want to meet him in a dark alley at 3 AM. Number 1. Taika Waititi, Adolf Hitler, Jojo Rabbit. When it comes to playing any real-life historical figure, no matter how despicable and infamous, there's usually a level of research most actors will commit to in order to understand the person they're playing. Taika Waititi had other ideas though, and instead of scanning through many a book or documentary to piece together vital information in the lead up to playing a version of Adolf Hitler in his 2019 flick Jojo Rabbit, he did the complete opposite, claiming that he didn't even do so much as a lick of research for his part of Jojo's imaginary pal Hitler. The fact this was also a version of the vile figure dreamed up by a 10-year-old ultimately resulted in a portrayal of himself that just so happened to boast a bad haircut, a little mustache, and a mediocre German accent. The mind behind the movie was also very much aware how folks likely wouldn't enjoy the imaginary friend version of the character as much had he played him like the actual Hitler, because as Taika effectively summed up, he was such an effing C-word, and everyone knows that as well. So why waste your time researching such a prick, eh?